Hi and welcome to 5.7 Production Planning. This is the first part of the PowerPoints for you to have a look at, and it's good to have a look at innovation again, and it makes the production planning with the R&D aspect to make a little bit more sense. Alright, we'll jump straight into it. I've got here some quick summary notes for you. The big part you have to get into is stock control, just in time, just in case, and the stock control graphs. Have a read through these notes at your own leisure. I've got some more detailed things down in the description bar. But this is put here for you if you don't have your textbook or you just can't be bothered getting it out. Alright, we'll get into the stuff. What are the big learning outcomes? That was a funny noise. Different stock control methods you've got here is just in time and just in case. So could you define just in time and define just in case, give the case reference, and give two impacts on the business, or three different differences depending how the question was asked. Analyze the appropriateness of each method. So as you get into a bit more detail, which is it better to have, just in case or just in time, given the production that you're doing? Also, recognize, this isn't in the direct IB command terms, but I probably put it down to identify why do you need to have optimum stock levels. So why don't you want too much, but you don't want to have too little? And lastly, this is the tricky one. I haven't seen this pop up in any exam questions yet, but they could ask you to prepare a stock control graph and talk about the strengths and weaknesses for one strength and one weakness about the actual graph itself. We've got 2/3 roughly is having a look at the just in time and the just in case and the stock levels, and a third of it's going to be used to show you what a stock graph looks like and how you make one. I've got some classifying stuff again, and we'll finish up with an exam question. Alright, lots and lots of definitions here, so we'll get straight into it. Your capacity utilization is the overall percentage of your potential capacity you're going to use. So ideally the dream is you're going to do 100%, but right now because there's some wastage or inefficiency or the way the machines are laid out or the way the stock's being used, you're going down to 80%. So you're missing out on 20% of potentially producing 100. There might be some MUDA parts in there as well that's causing it to occur. So you want to get your capacity utilization ideally to 100%. Your optimum stock levels is basically the highest percentage of stock you should keep around to not cause overstock use. If you have too much stock, you're using up some of your floor space in your factory to dedicate it to looking after that stock. So you might be wasting money on refrigeration or cooling or dehumidifying just to keep that stock there. You may as well not order it until you actually need it. The just-in-time method is a part that came out of the Japanese management systems, particularly with Kaizen going, we don't have to keep all this stock around, just bring it in when we need it and use it when it's being put directly into the production process rather than keeping lots of stock around. Ideally, you have no stock within the business whatsoever. So if you have no stock within the business, you don't have to dedicate floor space to it, you don't have to pay money on storage for those goods. The other part is just in case, and these two go together. Basically, you're going to order stock and it's going to wait around until it's ready to get used. So you're going to have warehouses full of raw materials and stock, potentially finished goods to get used in bigger goods later on down the track. Notice with just in time, you order it just when you need it, and just in case, you keep it lying around when you need it. The usage patterns, these gets used into the stock control graphs. And this is more or less using your data within your business to see when do I actually have to get new stock. So it helps with your just in time going, alright, if I know when we're getting down to the bad levels, we just have enough stock left to finish our production, when do we need to get it back again? So your usage patterns will tell you when to reorder. And this is the triggering of the reorder levels. So you might have 100 units, and when you get down to about 50, that triggers to you, reorder more stock before you get to nothing. Because when you have no stock left, production stops, particularly if you're using just in time and you've got no buffer to build into. The buffer stocks is the amount of stock before production stops. It sounds kind of stupid and obvious, but it's your just in case sort of approach. So we'll have a buffer stock that if things go really bad, we can at least continue to produce until something comes in. You might have bags of cement lying around even though you're building a house and you go, we don't need the cement, just in case the cement trucks can't come on the day, so we'll keep dry cement on the side to make production still continue even if we've got no wet cement. And lead times is basically the difference between the reorder levels and the buffer stock. So if it's about time to reorder and you've got your buffer stock, how much time is in between these two bits? It'll make more sense when we have a look at the stock control graphs. We'll get into it now. Can I encourage you to have a look at this tiny URL? It's a pretty good video, it goes for about 5 minutes, and it looks at the whole production process of doing flow production, but using just-in-time in conjunction with just-in-case at the manufacturing plant in Mississippi. And they've made this state-of-the-art brand new stuff where they've incorporated the best of Japanese and American management to really make their cars of a high-level standard. It's important to note here that Toyota is a car assembler. They assemble with the parts, not a manufacturer. They actually make everything on site. That's with the just-in-time part. So they bring all the goods in and then assemble it, rather than making the parts there and then put into the car and doing it. They want to do lean production, cut off all the unnecessary parts, and that's the way they decided to do it. There is some just-in-case though when you look through. Alright, you'll notice on here, this is what it looks like when you have lots of stock lying around with finished goods. And you can see the guy here with Alibaba Express, with the goods being shipped along and all those raw materials set up. What does this really do? This causes your raw materials and your finished products to all sit around your production facility. What's the big idea with this? So I went too far. This is going to cause a lot of holding stock. You have to pay for all this space. You could essentially have machines in here building and doing stuff for you, but instead you've got stock. You could have here, with the goods coming in, you could have this done off-site. And these raw materials and so forth, these could be brought in just in the time that you actually need them. It depends what business you're having a look at. Just note there's this stock and inventory part. So on here, note because the IB comes adapted from the A-levels in England, you've got shares and stocks. Shares are the actual shares that the shareholders own, a percentage of the business. Note that stocks are these things here. So your finished products and your raw materials are your stocks. Your shares are your certificates that you own to show you have a percentage of ownership of the overall business. This is just a change up between your American, Europe and Australian English and so forth. Just know that there's a difference as it goes through. We're going to be talking about stocks as being inventory. I'm not going to talk about shares as being stocks. Just know there's a difference. Alright, so what's the traditional stock methods? What's the way of holding it around? In the most basic sense, it was the just-in-case way of doing it. And what was the big problem behind that? Essentially, no business runs at 100%. There's always some area, and the theory is that area that was being wasted was holding onto that stock, keeping it within your business, amongst other things too. What does this really mean? It just means waste. So we're wasting money on storing these things when they could be put somewhere else and we bring them in just in time. Overall, this adds to your total fixed costs and your variable costs for electricity with refrigeration and dehumidifiers to keep that stock there. So it causes a big problem. In the more sort of, like the space saving area, you might have 60% of your floor space is used for machinery and labour, whereas the other 20% and so forth is used for your raw materials and stock. 20% other might be just because your workers aren't trained well enough and you've got communication, motivation issues, so you aren't working to 100%. It's this bit here, this 20%, where people start saying, what can we do about it? How do we fix this traditional stock method of controlling our stock and keeping it in place? This part here, when you put together, actually makes money for the business. So your machines and labour are making you dollars, and that's why it's good. Whereas the bottom part just costs the business money. Yeah, because it get used later on, but while it's sitting around, it's taking up floor space, so it's moving away from that 100% capacity that you could be employing potentially. This is one of the problems with traditional stock and just-in-case methods. There's nothing wrong with just-in-case, but just there was an idea that that space could be used for other purposes and make the business more efficient. So this is what it sort of looked like. This is a stock control graph. So this is a bit of the DOL 2 procedural stuff. On here is the number of stocks and here's the time. This is the just-in-case method. So one of the things that pops up is you've got your maximum stock, the total you should be keeping within your business. If you go beyond this, you really are wasting the space. You should be doing it. So over time, the number of stocks actually starts to decrease. And when it hits this point here, that's the level to trigger you or your supply manager to go reorder stock. When it gets down to the buffering levels, this part here is what sits around in your business just in case, ready for it to go. You then reorder it and your stock levels go back up at top again. And then as you move down the line, you get to a reorder point, gets to your buffer stock. And the buffer stock is meant to be the bit where you go, guys, we have to reorder more stuff before it goes down again. This is where the lead times actually come into place. And you might say lead times in a sense might be your panic time in a sense, where I'm concerned that reordering, getting down to buffer, is how many days do I have to wait before I actually get the full replenishment for it to come back up again. Businesses are often concerned with lead times to make sure the lead times is as short as possible. So the stock is always kept in this wonderful zone here, in this between maximum and the reorder stock levels. In here, the business feels comfortable that they can always meet orders and there's going to be no problems. Down here is the lead time area where you're concerned that you maybe start pushing into your buffer stock. You can probably get the idea now. Below the buffer stock level, you have to put this finished goods or this raw materials somewhere. And within your business, this is actually going to build up some of your raw materials and your total fixed and variable costs. If you want a sort of an example, think about Subway sandwiches. Subway sandwiches keeps all of their fresh ingredients outside because they've got to keep it fresh with some buffer stock. If they put this into just in time, which I'll show in a second, without this buffer stock, there might be some flow problems and to keep the whole business progressing along. So this is the other way. This is the modern stock control methods, and this is one of the ways that Toyota brought in. So it changed from being a manufacturer to an assembler. And they thought, all right, what we'll do is it'll follow the same things. And they had this, instead of calling the maximum, they call this the optimum stock. What's the most amount we should keep within our areas so we don't have to go beyond what the actual maximum might be? What's the optimum? What's the best amount? Should we keep like 60 tons rather than 100 tons? And it follows the same kind of premise in that as stocks start to go down, this is where you have to reorder, because when you get down to here, there's nothing left. So, whoops, jump back in there. This in here would be your lead time again. You want to make sure that when it gets down to this point, you then reorder back up to the optimum. You can see the danger that's now being performed here. There's no buffer in place anymore. So you're not having to pay for this storage to keep it around. But as you can tell, if you don't reorder at the right time, you don't keep your leads in the correct way, you can get down to nothing. And when you get to nothing, production stops. So it's the trade-off. Do you want to pay for the storage, or do you want to potentially, say, run out when needed? So you've got to be really on top of your supply chain to make it all work. Just to summarize it, what are the differences? I've got like a car sort of acrostic acronym here for you. The storage costs are higher because you have to pay for all the refrigeration, dehumidifiers. The just-in-time is lower, so you don't have to pay for all the stuff to stay around. The storage amounts are higher, so by keeping the storage around, you have to keep it, that takes away from your productive capacity. And it's lower for just-in-time. However, there's a greater risk with the storage. Just-in-case is lower because you have that buffer stock, whereas the just-in-time is much higher because there is no buffer stock kept around. You can probably guess there are certain businesses where it works better with just-in-time, particularly when the goods aren't perishable, where the just-in-case, yeah, you've got to keep stuff around to make sure you always have control because you critically need these goods and you're reliant on your suppliers to give them to you. Alright, we'll go through and have a look, and what I want you to do is just write in single words what you think might be the best parts for each of the classifying stuff. So with Toyota, what do you think they mainly do rather than what they normally do? You reckon just in time, just in case? What's an advantage and what's a disadvantage of doing this? McDonald's, and then maybe with your school. There's no really right or wrong answers. Just try working it out so it makes logical sense in your head. Feel free to pause now and have a go. Okay. When you watched before with Toyota, they're doing flow production and they're using just in time mainly. What's the advantage? You have decreased storage costs. What's the disadvantage? This may cause some serious production stoppages if there's no stock being available to replenish everything. At McDonald's, they tend to do things in batches. Once they've done their batches, McDonald's does just in case. They keep a lot of their frozen fries and nuggets ready to go. They don't order in a nugget every time they need it and so forth. What's the advantages? So they can meet large orders and small orders and still feel confident they can produce even if the orders change. What's the disadvantage? The storage costs of keeping them around. Your school will probably go with batch, and that you do them in like a batch of classroom. So you learn in one class at say 30, it then stops. You then go to another class with a batch of 30, then stops, batch of 30. You go through your 4 blocks for the day, and then you finish and go home. Rather than mass production and everything else. But yeah, a batch is the idea probably with this one. Your school will be doing just in case, so it keeps the pencils and paper and the erasers and so forth sitting around for when students need rather than ordering them in when they're needed. And the advantage of doing this is so you can meet when changing student levels go up and down and meet those needs. What's the disadvantage? Again, paying for storage costs for keeping it all around. Okay, here's an exam question for you to have a look at. And this is about Regal Motors, and I've called it Fakeville, so I've adapted something just to get you to think about it. But the idea is they did their packaging before. So how do they actually change their bits to make it more obvious and easier for the worker to get into it? So have a go at the questions, distinguish for 4 and examine for 6, and we'll get into it. Feel free to pause it now and have a go. Okay. With Regal Motors, they distinguish between just-in-time and just-in-case. So just-in-time is not keeping the stock lying around in storage. You're only ordering it when you need it. Where just-in-case is having a buffer stock sitting around within your factory floor to meet different needs and different production requirements. One difference would be your costs of doing it. Your next thing would be the amount of stock lying around. And lastly, the second bit would be the risk. So if you could put a definition with the 3 distinguishers, or 2 definitions and 2 distinguishers, you're probably getting your 4 marks there. So examine how JIT has increased capacity utilization at the Fakeville plant. Capacity utilization, so we're going to define that one, is your overall percentage of your total capacity available within the factory. And at this stage it was mentioning that it wasn't reaching its full, had an impact on the capacity utilization, and this had reduced potential profits as our example. What's one advantage doing just-in-time? Well, just-in-time has been brought in with its Kaizen approach, and they've actually brought in the stock and packed it correctly in the right times and brought it just in time for the production. So you can see the storage is not being used up for these cars as they're getting produced. What's one of the disadvantages? The disadvantage, of course, is the great risk that if these parts don't come in at certain times, all of the production is going to stop, and that makes a big impact on profits. Overall, it's recommended that they introduce just-in-time with the Kaizen approach to make sure that they have always the optimized stock levels, and they've limited the unnecessary movements so the workers' time is spent mainly on producing rather than moving around the factory trying to find stock in that just-in-case methods. Alright, we'll finish it up on here. Have a go at the worksheet down the bottom in 5.7 and try the IB questions in the back of your textbook. Read over 5.7 in the notes in the PDF. Do you feel today you can be successful to go that you see why you need optimum stock levels? Don't have to have the maximum, but the optimum, the correct amount, so you're not over keeping your stock, and as a result you're paying for storage you don't need to do. And it's going to get tricky to prepare the graphs. You just got to do it a few times, but it's always going to be the same with your amount of stock and time. And just note that when you're doing your starting from your maximum going down to your reordering points, if you're going to do just in case, there's going to be a buffering level, and if you're going to be doing it just in time, there's going to be no buffer stock left aside. It's just going to go directly down, up and down like this. That's the kind of stock graph you'd have to make. When you had to analyze it, just know it's going back to that car part with the cost of doing it, the amount, and the risks associated. What's the appropriateness in the different stock control methods? So you've got your just-in-time and just-in-case. And what's the appropriateness of each one? It goes back to car again. So how much cost am I willing to do it? What's the optimum level? What's the amount I want to keep around? Are the goods going to perish? Do I have to keep them around at all times? And what's my relationship with my suppliers? And also, what's the risk involved? Is it okay to take that risk on doing just-in-time? Or you just can't handle the risk because of goods perishing or the suppliers not being reliable enough? You've got to go back to just-in-case. In a basic sense, the modern stuff's the just-in-time and the traditional way is the just-in-case. That's it from me, and we'll go into 5.7b and I'll see you there.